One of the toughest things for people to get their head around when it comes to their nutrition is breaking free of the notion that there is good food and bad food. Organizations such as Slimming World and Fad Diets for years have demonized certain foods and glorified other foods, creating this all or nothing mindset that you have to eat nothing but the good and completely avoid the bad, and that if you so much as have a small amount of the bad, that you somehow fucked up. And I'm just about to break all of that down for you as to why not only is that bollocks, but also why it's probably holding you back with regards to reaching your goals. The first most important thing to realize is that there is no good and bad food. Good and bad diets, but not foods individually, because you can't quite simply just eat one salad and expect to drop weight, in the same way that you can't realistically expect to eat one higher calorie food and expect to gain lots of fat. And when you start to understand that, you start to understand that actually, if you're managing your calorie intake consistently, you can still include the foods that have perhaps been labeled bad and still reach your goals. Because the only way that we can either gain or lose fat is through the consistent consumption of the right amount of calories, i.e. to lose fat, the consistent consumption of less calories than you burn, and to gain fat, the consistent consumption of more calories than you burn. Now, obviously, it's easier to eat more calories than you burn because there's an infinite amount of calories that you can realistically eat within a day. It's not unheard of to go 3, 4, 5,000 calories over what your maintenance would be. Whereas when it comes to eating less calories than you burn, there's a finite amount of calories that you can consume. It's zero. So there's always calories under what you burn you can realistically be, which is why it's easier to go over than it is to be under. Least because it's more enjoyable to eat food than it is to not eat food. But the reason why I say there are no good and no bad foods, only good and bad diets, and that's because ultimately it's what your total diet looks like that will determine whether or not it's good or bad. And that's not necessarily just to do with the nutrient quality, it's more specifically to do with the calorie intake. Because if you're eating a particularly high calorie diet whilst trying to lose fat, you're probably going to find it quite difficult to stay in a deficit. And the reason why most people gain fat when they don't want to is because actually their diet isn't calorically matched. Actually, they're sedentary or have a very low activity level and they're eating quite high calorie foods. The foods themselves aren't the issue because in moderation, they'll be absolutely fine. It's the consistent overconsumption calories that causes the problems. So when you begin to understand how many calories your body needs and you begin to appreciate that that isn't a hard and fast rule that you have to do every single day, it's just what you need to average over an extended period of time, you begin to enjoy the flexibility that comes from including the food that you like in line with what your body requires. You begin to appreciate that yes, the volume and the frequency of higher calorie foods may need to be reduced from how often and how much you have right now, but simply eating these foods every now and then isn't going to ruin your progress. The harsh reality is any diet that promotes an all or nothing approach and demonizes certain foods and encourages the complete restriction of those foods significantly lowers your chances of success. Because whilst you may find for a short period of time it's easy to avoid these foods, you're not going to do that forever. And if the diet dictates in order to hold on to your progress you can never eat the things you like again, you're probably not going to stick to it. It's why it's so important to understand what your body needs from a caloric perspective and how to incorporate the food that you actually enjoy in line with that calorie target. Understanding that some days you will eat more calories, but that's more likely to be balanced out by the fact that some days you're going to eat much less calories. And rather than overreacting to moments in isolation, if we can grow the habit and the behavior patterns to trust the process and to manage calories consistently over extended periods of time, you get quite a bit more freedom and flexibility with what you can eat. But you also feel less out of control when you do consume slightly more calories than normal. You can also make significant progress over a decent period of time and not ever feel like you're actually on a diet because nothing is off the table. All that happens when we eat a bit more than we should is we potentially slightly delay the rate of which we're going to see progress, which isn't failing, it's just slowing things down to be able to enjoy your life that little bit more. It's why a fundamental part of the academy is understanding your calorie target and calculating your calorie target for you using the calorie calculator. So you've got a line in the sand that you can work towards each day without trying to be perfect, but to give you the guidance and the structure to know what to be aiming for. Because what gets measured gets improved. And if you're paying close attention to how many informed decisions about what you do have and when you do allow yourself to indulge than if you're not monitoring it whatsoever. You also have a lot less guilt and a lot less shame when you do eat high foods because you're not telling yourself, I can't eat this. Now, it will take time for you to settle into this kind of approach. It's not something that's going to happen seamlessly overnight, particularly if you have been dieting to things like Slimming World and doing fad diets and preach the complete elimination of certain foods. But over time, through the management and monitoring of your calories, you will begin to learn what you can and what you can't do, how often and how much, so that you can fully include the food that you enjoy in line with what your body needs. Hopefully you found this video useful. By all means, favorite it if you want to come back to it. But in summary, there are no good and bad foods. As long as you're managing your calorie intake effectively, you're going to be absolutely fine. And whilst nutrient quality is ultimately important to how you physically feel, it's not the be all and end all. Completely avoid all of the food that you like. So if you can find a way to incorporate those within your body's caloric needs, you're far more likely to enjoy the process and to make results you can keep hold of.